This video is designed for clients just prior to a 1 hour discussion on human performance technology. It's for those clients that are looking at how can they improve the execution within their organization and how they can build a more effective leadership culture. What we believe, and through all of our research, we find that the leadership culture is the core driver of any organization's success over the long term. The research that we're going to discuss is research that have been reviewed consistently by Harvard University as well as Stanford University, in which they confirm time and time again that the true impact of and what drives execution excellence is significantly the leadership culture. In fact, they've proven time and time again through different types of research that leadership culture accounts for roughly about 75% of the effectiveness of driving performance in individuals, only about 25%. Now, these things interact with one another, both the leadership culture and the individual within that culture, but it's key to understand just how important the leadership culture is. And their research started in terms of really looking at the differences between those companies cited as the best companies to work for versus those companies that were not. And this comparison over the years makes it clear that the host companies, in this particular example, Fortune 100 best companies to work for versus the overall Russell 3000, you see a significant difference in terms of performance and stock price as it relates to those companies that are best to work for. And when you dive into most of these companies, not all, but most of these companies, you find that their culture, their operating culture, and their leadership culture is significantly better. So what we'll get into is break down this 75% and this 25% in some detail. And we'll discuss it more when we have our coaching call. But again, this is just to give you a preview to dive into some of the thinking and ideas, and then we can discuss it when we have our coaching call. The individual consists of the individual's capacity, motives, and skills and knowledge. All those areas are critical, right, to getting the job done. Then you have on the other side that's provided by the leader, information, resources, and incentives. All these things are driven by the leaders within that organization establishing a leadership culture. Now we're going to take a quick view of when cultures are studied, there's certain levels of power that are used within that organization that drives performance and gets individuals to do things. So we're going to discover very briefly the 6 sources of power, and we want to ask you to think about what's the primary source of power that's operating within your organization.
There's a very famous research study conducted by 2 researchers, French and Raven, and it said we essentially have 6 power bases that we routinely can employ: reward, coercion, legitimate power, expert power, referent power, and informational power. So reward and coercion, the ability to give and the ability to take. Expert, power of knowledge. Legitimate, power bestowed upon you as an entity that has the ability to make decisions that govern others' actions. Referent, which is all about power bestowed on you by others. And finally, information, power of being able to share insights. When you take a look at legitimate power, much like reward and coercion, you can only get so far if you routinely leverage that in terms of the 3 major outcomes associated with power. So you can either resist somebody's use of a power, you can comply, or you can commit. Legitimate power typically doesn't bring about commitment. If you routinely employ legitimate power, it can bring about compliance. Sometimes it can bring about resistance. One time I witnessed something that was very telling when I was a young officer in the military, in that I saw an individual who constantly was bossing people around, and he was constantly threatening them with, if you don't do the following, I'm going to make sure that this happens to you. So very big on using legitimate, very big on using coercion. So what started to transpire were people did exactly what he told them to do. But they knew there were countless other things that were implied but weren't specifically stated, and so they elected only to do the things that were stated and to ignore the things that were implied in service of accomplishing the task. And the individual became more and more upset, and he's like, well, why didn't you do this, this, and this? And they said, well, that's not what you told me. And so it was a clear example of how legitimate and coercion, while efficient, might not lead to effective outcomes, because individuals have to fill in the blanks with a lot of things in order to bring about successful organizational achievement. If you want to get at achieving commitment, the two power bases that most often lead to that outcome are expert and referent. Expert because people can really see, hey, this individual has a deep understanding of what is required to be successful. And referent because if an individual opens himself up to another's influence, it's because they have determined this person will take care of me.
Now, one thing that we've found in understanding leadership cultures is those cultures that are highly effective with superior execution use more of reverent power versus legitimate power, or indefinitely, they use less coercive power when it comes to really achieving superior execution. We'll talk more about that on the call. But to get more into details in terms of what breaks down the leadership culture, let's look at all the various pieces, starting with the information. Essentially, are people getting directional information in terms of what the job is about? Are they getting information in terms of the results that they are expected to achieve? Clear performance objectives, roles and responsibilities, tasks that are set in priority of importance, up-to-date procedures, as well as decision guides or follow-ups to make sure that they're doing the job as effectively as possible. And then on an ongoing basis, do they receive ongoing confirmation around if they are doing a good job or not? Is that confirmation frequent, actionable feedback? And is that feedback coming from boss, coming from their environment? Or do you have systems in place where you don't have to always rely on the boss to get that feedback relative if they're doing a good job or not? Are they getting feedback from their customers? Do you have different types of customer surveys that can get back specifically to a department and an individual in terms of how well they're doing in terms of supporting the customer? And as well as, are they able to do you have the kind of environment, leadership culture, that's created an environment where peers can honestly, openly provide each other with feedback in a safe way? So that's the information side. On the resource side, do people have the tools, resources, time, and materials that's designed for high performance? And that's critical. Do they have the tools and resources that's designed for high performance? Versus giving them computers that are out of date, or computers that have bad software, or whatever the case might be that gets in the way of exceptional performance. Do they have access to decision makers to resolve problems and conflicts immediately? Or are they saving things up for later, and that gets in the way and creates all kinds of issues for them being able to efficiently and effectively do their job? Is there sufficient personnel to do the job as the job was designed? And then is the work processes organized in a way that promotes efficiency, effectiveness, and simplicity? These are all the aspects of that the leadership culture and the leaders create, that's included in the resource area. Then we look at incentives. Set incentives in terms of feedback. Is the feedback accurate? Is the feedback actionable? Is the feedback timely? Is the feedback designed to promote learning and growth, or is the feedback designed to point the finger or to make the other person feel bad? And is there clear consequences for exceptional performance as well as consequences for poor performance? From a monetary standpoint, is the compensation fair? Are there benefits? Again, looking at your relative competitive market, is there some degree of work-life balance? Are bonuses tied to performance? And is there rewards and recognition? So, how does that stand in your organization as it relates to incentives? And then ongoing removal of barriers. Are there unnecessary paperwork and regulations that can be dealt with? Is automation being done of low-level tasks? Are work interruptions? Are there too many meetings, non-value activities, and that kind of thing? So again, this only accounts for 11%, but things that need to be looked at that gets in the way of execution and performance. Now we'll take a look at the other side in terms of the individuals, the knowledge and skills, capacity, and motives. On the knowledge and skill side, are the training and the education that's done, is it performance based? Is it interactive? Is it learner paced? The training and education that's done, and is it just in time for the activity or performance or results that needs to be achieved? When you look at the training and development, is there a proper transfer of training and application and follow-up to that training? Do you teach principles in terms of the why and the practices, which represents the how? And then is the supervisor and employee held accountable for the application and continuous improvement? And organizations that are high performance, that have solid, strong leadership culture, have accountability for communicating the why, as well as hold the supervisor and the employee accountable for the application of whatever training or performance details that need to take place in order to achieve the performance that's necessary. And then capacity. Are you matching people with the right position, and are you looking at the right attributes in terms of technical skills, in terms of physical and intellectual skills, in terms of strength and dexterity, intelligence in terms of EQ and IQ? Are you looking at conceptual ability, creativity, strategic capability, and leadership? All these capabilities, and some leaders might look at this and say, wow, do we really have the time to explore all these things in people? The bottom line is, if you don't take the time up front to make sure that there's proper match throughout their employment, you're going to find that you're always pulled into issues in which there's a lack or gap in that individual's capability. And that gap needs to be filled in somewhere. And it's either going to be filled in by yourself, or it's going to take someone off their job and their responsibility to fill in that particular gap. So it's critical that this kind of review takes place. And some organizations leave it to a headhunter or a search firm to do that. And my advice to them, don't do it. You want to get their input, but also you need to be able to verify and vet each individual that comes into your organization yourself around these skills and capabilities. And then motives gets into hire people that match the realities of the culture and the work conditions. Hire employees whose needs can be satisfied. And this is absolutely critical, that you understand what are the needs of the people, not only from a financial standpoint, but from a work balance standpoint, a relationship standpoint, all the key things. Really have a clear understanding of what needs they want to have met in your employment, and then that you're able to deliver on those needs. And if you can't, to say that you can't, and give that person the opportunity and choice to decide if they want to work in the organization or not. Also, hiring for the right opportunities that support the collaboration and the high performance that you want to create within your environment, as well as hire people that your customers, partners, and key stakeholders will like. So those are the motives aspects. And so at our call, we'll discuss some of this from an overall standpoint, and then also talk about what gets in the way of really putting all these practices into play, and that's the ability of the organization, the leaders, to 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 deal with and manage conflict. The conflict that comes across any organizations, and that's where superior leadership cultures have embedded in their values, in their systems, the ability to deal with and manage conflict. Look forward to speaking with you.